Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about hamstring training or hamstring specialization to focus on weak hamstrings. This is actually a really common muscle imbalance. Not only in athletes, we see it obviously in athletes, and if you have an athlete with a hamstring weakness, you are at actually a risk of injury. Okay? These are the guys who hurt their knees. These are the guys who get tears and pulls and things out on a playing field. Okay, a lot of track and field athletes, this is a problem for you. This causes injuries. You also see the same thing in a lot of gym bros. We see a lot of gym bros with just weak posterior chains in general. Weak hamstrings are common, and accordingly, we see pulled hamstrings. We see injuries. We see lower back injuries fairly commonly also in guys with weak hamstrings. Okay, these are the guys who get hurt. These are the guys who might look good, but they get hurt. And it's a very clear muscle imbalance. And it's something that if you want to be fit and athletic, you need to have fully developed thick hamstrings. It's one of the most common weaknesses we see in gym bros, even ones who think they do some leg training. So let's talk about it. Now, you guys know I'm a big fan of deadlifts. I love deadlifts. And the sumo deadlift, as I'm doing there, is a tremendous hamstring activation tool. But realistically, other than maybe for ranked novices, it's very difficult to get enough total training load to build maximum hamstrings off deadlifts. And in fact, what do we see? Guys who use hamstrings exclusively, who use deadlifts exclusively to build their hamstrings tend to be prone to hamstring pulls. When I have cut out all of their hamstring work, I've pulled hamstrings twice, right? I've done it 2 different times since I've been on YouTube. Both times were when I had gone essentially a year without doing very serious hamstring work outside of deadlifts. And it happens like clockwork for me, right? It happens like clockwork. So high on my list is going to be hip hinges that we can do a lot of volume with. Now, I prefer good mornings. A lot of people will look at that, and I'll have other people who will say, well, I think good mornings are high risk. Well, they can be if done incorrectly. And they're like, I prefer a Romanian deadlift. I prefer a stiff leg deadlift. And you know what? That's perfectly reasonable as long as you can handle the training volumes. And that's fine for base building. I would go so far as to say that because you can get a good stretch reflex on a Romanian deadlift, there's nothing wrong with using it as your first tool. All right, early on, if you want to do Romanian deadlifts, perfectly reasonable. You get a good myotatic reflex on the hamstring. It gives a good hypertrophic response there. It's a very hamstring dominant exercise. You can do more volumes of it than you can with a deadlift, whether conventional or sumo. So I don't think it's a bad choice. It's just not always my first choice if I have someone who can do good mornings. Now, I might have a person do both. There are cases where someone would do both. Perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable to do both. But it has to do with the fact that maybe they haven't built up a base yet on good mornings. Good mornings are one of these exercises that you need to build some base on first. And so sometimes I might say you could use a Romanian deadlift to get a base up with a more stretch reflex oriented hip hinge. But ultimately, look at what I'm doing there on these good mornings. We're seeing a nice wide stance, a very wide stance good morning. Now, look at that in terms of the same stretch reflex you get on a Romanian deadlift. It's the same effect, right? And people will notice my range of motion. My range of motion, because of the stance, is geared towards getting the same lower body activation we do on a Romanian deadlift, right? This looks exactly like an RDL from the waist down. The upper body, however, the bar is loaded completely different. This is easier to recover from. Because we aren't holding it in our hands, and people say, well, I could get extra grip training by holding it in my hands. You could, but most guys strap up for high volume RDLs. This is slightly easier to recover from. Because you're dealing with a weight up top the way that you are, a lighter weight gives the exact same amount of tension through the hamstrings and posterior chain, right? And we get a little bit of extra T-spine involvement. So because we're forced to use a lighter weight, because for me, even with 185 on the bar, I would need 315 or more for the same 5x10 to get the same amount of activation on an RDL. All right? It would be about the same. And it just has to do with the forces involved. But because we are utilizing a a lighter weight to get the same training response, it's going to be easier to recover from. Why does that matter? Well, if we want to specialize in something, recovery is the name of the game. Recovery is the name of the game. We have to have recovery. Because again, how do we bring up a weak point? We need maximum training volumes. And it needs to be recoverable volume. Now, could I argue, rightfully so, that an RDL, if I wanted extra grip training and throw the straps away for it, sure, an RDL would be good. If you wanted to get a heavier focus on grip and less concern over something like maybe your T-spine up there, that would be a good trade-off. An RDL would make sense in that case. It would make sense in that case. But for the people who are just going to strap up for the RDL, I would say just get strong at good mornings. And the good mornings are a very, very versatile tool. There's more versatility available there. But you know what? They're both good choices. The point is that we're getting a good stretch reflex-based hip hinge. And I think that's valuable for base building of your hamstrings. But here's the other thing. We've got to have knee extension. Okay. I happen to utilize glute ham raises because I dished out my own money out of my pocket and bought a glute ham raise device. I think that this is a premier exercise. No, I do not advocate people do the Nordic hamstring curl. Okay, it is hard on your knees. This is safer. Safer, adjustable for different amounts of tension. We can hook bands up to it. It's easy to use plates on it if we need to, but the thing is, even the post down at the bottom, if you need to add extra tension, you can wrap bands around and then hold them or wrap them up around your neck or shoulders. Band tension, because if you think about that, you think about that peak contraction involved, man, bands. My God, these against bands would blow your hamstrings up, assuming you're strong enough to do that. But why do we need the knee extension? Because the hip hinge only works 2 of the 3 heads of the hamstring effectively. We have a third head that gets dramatically less activation, and it's really just radiant effect. It gets a radiant effect from a hip hinge. So we need that bending of the knee. It becomes essential. If you do not have access to a glute ham device, your other options there might be to have to use a hamstring curl. And I'm not above that. I would say someone who doesn't have a GHR, who is really concerned about knee stability, hamstring development, and injury prevention, is probably going to need to do some hamstring curls. I just think that this is a vastly superior exercise. Now, failing that, what if you don't have either one? Well, you might need to learn how to do them with bands. You're going to need to find a way to use bands to do hamstring curls. There's a lot of different ways you could set that up depending on the equipment you have. Some would say, well, couldn't someone use dumbbells? No, I think the dumbbells suck. I think bands are going to be superior to dumbbells for that. You can get a lot more weight. You can get more tension. Get a lot more development. Getting any sort of appreciable resistance with dumbbells for your hamstring is nearly impossible unless you're very, very weak. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I think bands are a superior tool. And if you don't have access to a hamstring curl or a glute ham device, you're probably in a situation to where bands may be your best option. You may not even have good dumbbells at that point. Bands are a much superior option. But these are going to be my go-tos. Like this is really, ideally, if you really, really need to bring your hamstrings up, I think the most versatile tools we have are going to be the good morning. They're going to be the good morning and the glute ham raise. And we have access to a lot of variations because of different bars, bands, chains. These are easy to load different ways. Same thing with the glute ham device. We have different ways to load it. It's a pretty versatile tool as far as well-rounded hamstring development. Now, failing that, as I've said, Romanian deadlifts, acceptable substitute if you don't have maybe the upper back strength or you're uncomfortable with good mornings. I think it's fine. I think good morning is better, but I think a Romanian deadlift can go a long way. I think you can do a good job. Combined with, again, something for that. Again, we need the knee movement. So that would be a leg curl or a leg curl against bands if you do not have access to the glute ham device. But I'm going to say realistically, and as much as I love the deadlift, if you really want to maximize development in that area, you're going to need to do extra hamstring work. You're going to need it. For guys who want to be really thick, but as well as for people who want to be strong, athletic, low injury risk. You want to be more functional. In other words, the more athletic you are with the lower risk of injury due to proper development, to me, that's functional. That's functional strength. So you're going to need to get some sort of hip hinge with a stretch reflex, and you're going to need something in which you curl the hamstring. You have to have that action of the knee happening. In other words, you're not going to fully develop the muscle without it, and you're going to be leaving both gains on the table and be leaving yourself at a higher risk of injury. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.